trading deadlines, we've got the Orioles in first place, the Orioles in second place. The Orioles are going to lose. Now they're going to tie it. Now they're going to win. It has been a roller coaster ride on the baseball side, and things have been relatively calm in Owings Mills. Luke Jones has been running between the footballs and the baseballs and the diamonds and the gridirons and working on very little sleep, and we're just getting into this fun thing, Luke, that we call a pennant race in conjunction with training camp, and the trading deadline looms large, but the Orioles stumbling, bumbling, fumbling their way through the weekend right on up until the 12th inning on Sunday, where they at least broke the losing streak, escape Toronto, come back in first place, take a little breather, wait for the Ravens to get a practice in, and get back after it with the first place Rangers this week. It's a wild week, and we got a real, honest-to-God pennant race here, Luke Jones.
No doubt about it, and it's a chance to exhale. As you just said, the first two games of this series were ugly. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Kevin Gausman, pretty woeful on Friday night. Yovani Gallardo completely falls apart after, kind of hanging in there for a few innings and then just completely getting crushed after that. And the Orioles could generate nothing for the first 6 innings in Toronto. They get a couple productive outs to tie the game in the 7th inning, and then goes on to the 12th inning while their bullpen did an excellent job. I mean, Chris Tillman last 5 2/3. The bullpen tosses just outstanding work, 6 1/3 shutout innings. And finally, in that top of the 12th inning, Jonathan Scope breaks through, and Adam Jones, a 3-run homer. First time the Orioles had scored more than 5 runs in a game since July 6th.
Let's do the math on that again. And right, I mean, wow. And they're still in first place. That's the amazing part, right?
Yeah, they are. And we kind of talked about this, and thank goodness, I mean, the month of July was just so painful for this offense. The Orioles went 12-14 in July, largely because they pitched better. Now, it hasn't been perfect, and clearly they didn't pitch well the first 2 games of this series, but they've really struggled with the bats big time. But finally,
the hitting was good. Now the pitching is good. If they could just figure it all out at the same time, right?
Right, and I think they're going to hit better. Now, will they have another month like they had in June? That remains to be seen. But
my dad would say right now, they're due. They're due.
Oh, they are, and that's why it was so nice to see them come through in the 12th inning. And again, the season wasn't going to be over if they lost on Sunday, but then you're looking at just a losing streak of 6 games. You're coming home. You're playing another first-place team. You're stewing for your off day, knowing that you're at least a game and a half out of first place at that point if you lose.
Dude, I was on Facebook and Twitter with you on Sunday, right? And clouds were forming, right?
Oh, no doubt about
it. That's how we could put it, right?
Hey, we've kind of talked about it all year. And look, I'd much rather have fans feel this way than apathy like was the case for so long when no one was even paying attention at this point. But, all season long, I mean, this team's been in first or second place. They've spent, I believe, a total of 100 days in first place. But every time they lose a couple games, there's been this, and I'm not saying everyone, but there's been a sense of pending doom with many Orioles fans.
As is in any fan base at this point,
no doubt
right?
about it.
I mean, it's a roller coaster. It's 162 games,
it is,
man.
It is, exactly. And, some fans, I think, have a little more of a football mentality, which is fine, but nice to just calm things down a little bit on Sunday. And, by the way, this win doesn't mean that everything's fine either. They need to come home. They need to have a good showing against the Texas Rangers, and then they go out west. I mean, that's going to be a challenging trip for them. So, come home, get some rest, get back on the saddle Tuesday, and have a good showing against the Rangers, and then they'll head to Chicago, and then all the way out west, out in Oakland and San Francisco. So,
well, I was going to say, you and I have firsthand experience with how hard it is to survive a week in San Francisco.
Well, I don't know if they'll be partaking in as much food and everything as they're out there, but again, this team has clearly struggled of late. There's no doubt about it. Over the last month, one of the big themes I thought of the first 3 months, and this was right before I left for vacation, when the Orioles had that brief 2-game set in San Diego where they scored all the runs. They were on a record pace for home runs, had the huge June, and at that point in the season, they had one losing streak of 4 games. And to that point, they'd had some rough patches. They had the rough patch in late May when they were in Houston and had the major league record for strikeouts in a 3-game series, but for the most part, they had really limited the tough times. They've struggled more they struggled more in the month of July with that because they had 3 different losing streaks of 4 or more games. So I mean, it's something that's concerning. It's not something that means that the season's over or they can't get to where they want to go, but they need to be able to limit some of those tough times. Certainly over the last 2 months, they need to try to limit those losing streaks and hopefully put together a couple more winning streaks. But this team is still in good position. We'll see how everything shakes out with the trade deadline, and then in the month of August with the waiver deadline as far as any enhancements they can make. I'm guessing it's not going to be anything major, but in the meantime, this is still a good club. They haven't played well recently, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the way this team's produced over 104 games, knowing that they still have a lot of work to do, nothing is guaranteed, but I'm not going to, even if they had lost on Sunday, I wasn't going to be the guy to throw in the towel and say the season's over by any stretch.
Well, Sunday's game, really, of all the games they've played over the years, as important as any game, right? I mean, first versus second, teams going in different directions, trading deadline coming up. I don't know that anybody would have circled it on the calendar and said this is the way it was going to be going down, playing for first place on the eve of the trading deadline. I like it. Certainly Blue Jays fans like it. It's been a generation for really both of these franchises until recent times where they could play games like this. But when you play games like this, there is an extra focus on it. There is an extra, this is really, really important because these teams aren't getting together very often. And, I mean, let's be honest. It's the Red Sox and the Blue Jays and the Orioles. All of these games should be magnified because this really is the pennant race right now.
It is, and this game, I think, probably more so than the big picture of the season. I think this game was a morale booster for the Orioles. They've had so many struggles in July. They've had the losing streaks. You're facing the possibility of being swept. Let's remember, this team will go to Rogers Center for a 3-game set the final week of the season, and you're hoping that it's going to be deciding potentially a division and, at the very least, in the wild card picture. So, I think it was important to get this one. It's great to move back in the first place, but that can be very fleeting if they go and lose 2 out of 3 or get swept to the Rangers. So, but I think it does stop the bleeding a little bit. Makes you feel better about yourself on the plane ride home. Makes you feel better about yourself on Monday as you get some much-needed rest. And but on the same side, or on the flip side, it is important to take care of these teams. I mean, the Orioles have done a good job against the Red Sox this year. They've played well at Fenway Park. They haven't played well at Rogers Center, and we know that they had the rough time in that 4-game set in early June where they won the first one and then lost 3 in a row. And you didn't want to be in a position where you've lost 6 straight in the Blue Jays Stadium.
Yeah, I tend to blame it all on Getty Lee. That's what I do.
I saw you tweet about that the other night. But it's just it's so funny because they could have won the opener and then lost the last 2, and then you'd be talking in a way more negative tone. But there's just something about salvaging the final game, going into the off day, going home, where you played so well at Camden Yards, and getting back in the first place where, it doesn't erase everything. It doesn't forgive the fact that they had a 5-game losing streak prior to Sunday, but it just makes you feel a lot better about things. So, moral victories, big games, must-win games, a lot of that stuff is overblown, especially when you're still talking late July and having 2 months to go in the season. But I think this was just one of those games where you exhale after and say, all right, things have stabilized a little bit, get home, and then get ready for the Texas Rangers.
Well, you spend a weekend watching the Blue Jays play, and you gain an appreciation. And I don't know what's going to happen with Tulowitzki, and certainly there's been some bad blood between these teams as well. Right. And I'll say one other thing on Sunday. Buck hadn't used the bullpen, the core of the bullpen, O'Day, Brock, Britton, sort of kind of like that, and was trying to make that happen. And lo and behold, next thing you know, you're out there in the 11th and the 12th inning and sort of holding on for dear life, trying to say, look, we spent the whole afternoon. We got Sanchez out. We were going to lose this game in the 7th inning and scored a couple of runs. Just sort of like war of attrition in bullpen to go 12 innings deep. It's nice to have a little time off, but those guys needed to get some work too.
They did. And remember, we talked about this after the Minnesota game. I mean, I flat out wrote, and I said it to you, I think the Orioles kind of punted that Thursday game. That's not to say that they didn't have a chance to win, but the fact that they started Jimenez, first of all, to slide Gausman to Friday, which we see how that worked out. So, all your plans can look great on paper, but it doesn't always work out.
Yeah, then you got to go play.
Yeah, and we talked about how they didn't bring Brock in that game, and they had Despaigne in the 7th inning and a tie game at that point. But they didn't really have opportunities to use their top guns Friday and Saturday because, well, they weren't really in those games. Now Friday they were able to, that was a game. That was a game that they had a chance.
Yeah, but, Saturday really got away from them.
Yeah, I mean Saturday was completely, got out of hand very quickly in that 5th inning. But it was nice to see them do what they were able to do with their bullpen. And then, how about the fact that they go with Logan Ondrusek, who had been pitching in Japan. Now he's a guy with Major League experience, but a bizarre signing on Friday. I mean, the Orioles have done some weird things under Dan Duquette. And I'm not even saying they've all been bad, but plenty of weird things. That some of them worked out, some of them have not.
It's kind of a franchise tradition now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and like I said,
like sort of firing your manager of the year in 1997. I mean, there's just been weird stuff going on forever and ever around here.
Well, but I'm talking more specifically some of the weird acquisitions that Dan Duquette has made, and some of them have worked out. Some of them have been, okay, it looks really strange on paper, and then works out really well. But it was nice to see. I thought Buck Showalter using Zach Britton, even though it wasn't a save situation. There are managers who specifically will save their closer for a save situation when you're on the road, and you use guys like Gibbons and Ondrusek before you get to Zach Britton. There are plenty of managers who do that, and Buck Showalter's done that before, but I think he realized how important it was to try to get this game. You go with O'Day, you go with Brock, and Britton needed the pitch, as you pointed out, and he goes 2 innings. And, 26 pitches, not an outrageous number, so I don't think he put him in harm's way, but I like how he used his best guys. But then they got into a position where you had to go back to Givens, who was not good on Saturday. It was nice to see him get back out there and fare better, although, still too many walks that he's issuing, which has been a problem with him in addition to some of the struggles against left-handed hitting. And then they get the 4-run lead, and that's why it was important for Adam Jones to hit the 3-run shot there. I'm guessing you're not feeling so good about Ondrusek in there in the 12th inning trying to save a 1-run game. So it was nice to see that, but really nice work from the bullpen, and that was the reason why Buck tried to preserve them as much as he could on those last couple games before the Toronto series, and finally came to fruition, and they were able to bear some fruits of that labor that they kind of sacrificed in that Minnesota game.
All right, well, you talk about acquisitions and the trading deadline and teams picking up players. Obviously, the key offseason acquisition for the Orioles in pitching was Gallardo, and yet again on Saturday really did not put them in a position to win the baseball game, and we're going to ask this question every 5th day: who's going to take the ball? And stock's up on Bundy, stock's down on Gausman, stock's really down on Gallardo, I guess, at this point. Even though we've talked about velocity being something that was a factor in the spring that is better here in the summer. But in general, I'm with you. The hitting will be better. I mean, the slump's a slump. However long it's been, July 6th with the 5 runs and all that, they'll score more than 5 runs. Plenty the rest of the way. The question is, who's going to pitch? And that's been the question all along. And as we stand on the trading deadline, the question is still, who's going to pitch? And, Gallardo and Gausman clearly are going to pitch. How well remains to be seen.
Yeah, and let's not be too hard on Kevin Gausman, who had pitched pretty well his last few times out prior to that. I mean, he was, don't get me wrong, he was bad on Friday. There's no way to sugarcoat that. But he's someone who has certainly pitched a lot better than Yovani Gallardo has when they've both been healthy and in this rotation. So I still feel okay about Gausman. Would I like to see him take another step forward? Yeah, but until he improves his breaking ball, and I think the other thing that he needs to be able to do at this level is be a little more willing to pitch inside against right-handed hitting. I just think that's going to hold, until he does those things, the talk of him being a top-of-the-rotation kind of guy, I think is just put on hold. He's a major league pitcher. Even after that start, he's still a guy who has an ERA in the low 4s, which this year when we've seen home runs and power and those things up around baseball, you'll tolerate that. You'd like more. Frankly, they need more from him if they're going. If they are going to get in the postseason, he's going to be their number 2 starter. in any series. They need more from him. But with Gallardo, I was talking about this a little bit after his start against Colorado. He had the 7-inning out against the Yankees where he wasn't great, but the Orioles scored they got shut out in that game. It was looking like a guy who was a little more aggressive in throwing strikes. What we saw against Toronto, which, look, that's a great lineup. They were the best lineup in baseball a year ago. They're not the best this year because Boston has held that title, but they've certainly been hitting the ball, and they've been really, really good offensively for about 6-7 weeks now after kind of an underwhelming start by their standards. But with Gallardo, you just saw a guy again who was afraid to throw strikes, trying to work the outer quadrants of the strike zone, the corners of that zone. But, he's just not fine enough with it. We've seen his walk rate go through the roof this year when he's been a guy has shown pretty good command in his career. So, he's gonna be in this rotation. You hold your breath, especially when you're going to play teams like Toronto and Boston. Lesser teams might be able to be a little more competitive for you. And he's had some decent outings since returning from the disabled list, but it's definitely been disappointing. And when you're talking about a guy with an ERA approaching 6, 5.7 at this point, it's not good enough. They need to get better from him. And you mentioned the trade market. The Orioles had interest in a guy like Andrew Cashner, didn't work out. We've heard the different names where Hellickson, go down the list.
Well, interest in a guy and then actually pulling it off and actually being, and we talk about this in the offseason with Angelos and money, you need to be the highest bidder, right? Literally, whatever is out there, you need to be competitive in that market and offer the best. They've never really shopped in the top shelf this time of year. They're clearly, if James Shields is the top shelf, I hate the hell to see the bottom shelf, right? But, we're going back even 2 months into this trading season. Teams have definitely improved this week. Certainly, we'll talk about the Indians and going after Miller. And,
sure.
Everybody's doing something, and I think every fan here has a legitimate, what are you guys doing? Do you really want to win, or are you just going to stand pat?
I'm going to stop. They want to win. We've talked about this, and let's not change the narrative just because we're at the trade deadline now. This team doesn't have a whole lot to offer right now. It's
Fair
one
enough.
thing to say you want to trade for someone, and they've been, look, if they don't make any moves, then I understand frustration. At the same time, I don't want this team to trade another Zach Davies for a Gerardo Parra who didn't help them at all last year. So, I understand the frustration, but, I wrote this a week ago, and I'll stand by it. This team you don't just make a move just for the sake of making a move. We heard the names Wade Miley, Jorge De La Rosa. If they make a move like that, fine. Do I really think it?
We've already got 2 Giovanni Gallardos
exactly.
and Ubaldo
and that's
Jimenez.
my point. But I don't think it's fair to say it's a case that they don't want to win because, this team spent a heck of a lot of money in the offseason. Now, you can say whether they spent it wisely. That's certainly fair to say, but they want to win.
They didn't do enough pitching-wise in the offseason. They just didn't. And that has haunted them all along, and it's haunting them now. And whatever treasure trove they even had at the minor league level, if they had such a thing, they would have put themselves in a position to deal another Davies away or Rodriguez or Arrieta or whomever you would say that could go somewhere else and blossom or bust, quite frankly. But when you're in first place, there is sort of and it's rare, very rare around here in my 25 years of doing this on a daily basis, that they're in this position. You'd like to think that they could do something, and I'm with you. There's nothing you can do, and you don't have the minor league system, but it should be talked about as though, come on. You've talked about being on the cusp of winning and going all in. They are all in. All in might not be good enough, quite frankly.
Right. And, the Andrew Miller trade 2 years ago, a lot of people talk about that right now. You debate it, but at the same time, you look at what the haul that the Yankees got for him from Cleveland. They gave up 4 prospects. Now, Andrew Miller is under contract for the next 2 seasons, so a little different in the sense that that's a full-blown acquisition as opposed to a rental. But it just shows that getting impact players, even relievers, at this point is not cheap at the deadline. The bigger indictment here isn't that if the Orioles hypothetically fail to make any kind of a substantial trade here, It's not that Dan Duquette didn't pull off a trade in late July or August 1st. The indictment is the state of the farm system right now and what that means. The indictment is you either don't have pieces to help you in your starting rotation, and to this point, Mike Wright, disappointing. Tyler Wilson had a few moments here and there, but overall, not good enough.
I mean, I would say this. I understand if we had phenom players that we just don't want to give away for De La Rosa or Cashner or, somebody that is painfully mediocre, let alone like what the Rangers did last year and going out in the market and sinking a lot of money and talent into Cole Hamels. But to get a frontline guy, I just feel like the organization is really skating around with this because there is no frontline guy, and it feels like it's not really coming outside of Tillman and where he is. But the years and years that have stacked up, that even if they had frontline guys right now, they probably wouldn't be in a position to deal those kind of phenom players. They wouldn't be dealing their Manny Machado for some fifth starter anyway, even if they had that.
Yeah, I mean, you can make that argument, but it's tough because at the same time, look at some of the deals they have made that just frankly haven't worked out. Now, the Jake Arrieta one everyone will talk about. I still contend I'm not sure Jake Arrieta ever figures it out here in Baltimore. And, that's an indictment of the Orioles' pitching development, which is probably the bigger issue more than any deals they've made or haven't made. But, it's just tough. I mean, you want to make a trade. You want to try to make your team better. But at the same time, if the Orioles had decided last year even to not even, we debated whether they should sell. Even if they had done nothing, Zach Davies, I don't know if he'd have the same numbers pitching in the American League East that he has for Milwaukee this year. But I'll tell you this, he'd sure be helping the back end of their rotation right now. So it's so tough because you want to try to have that boost for your club to, not just in production, but also you want to send a message to your club that, hey, we're trying to get better. But at the same time, lots of these moves that are made, you end up not getting the return. I mean,
they gave Miguel Gonzalez away over $5 million. They just gave him away,
and
right?
you can kind of connect that with, were they looking to get rid of him because they signed Yovani Gallardo? I mean, who knows? But on the flip side, remember this team talked 2 years ago a lot about getting John Lester. It was talked about a lot, whether it was Harvey or Bundy or whatever they were trying to trade at that point in time. It never happened, but the Oakland A's did it. And you see what happened there.
Haven't been the same since.
That was, they dealt Cespedes, and in the Orioles' case, if they were going to get a Chris Sale or someone like that right now, they'd have to trade Jonathan Scope and Dylan Bundy, or they'd have to trade Jonathan Scope and Kevin Gausman. And there, you ask the question: are you really netting that much to even make it worth it? So, my point is, it's not to be wishy-washy about this. Yeah, you'd love to add an impact starting pitcher, and who knows? Maybe they can pull off. Not necessarily, certainly not a number one or number two type, but maybe they can find a guy that can settle into the middle of their rotation. But at the same time, you don't want to just make a mistake and give up a piece that can help you in the next couple of years for very minimal return. And, that's exactly what happened last year with Zach Davies for Gerardo Parra. Parra had been a very average major league player who was having a really good 2015 season. The Orioles were desperate because their corner outfield situation was awful last year. And what did they do? They dealt away a guy who, think about it. I'm not saying Davies, having him right now would put them as the surefire favorite to win the pennant, but they'd be in better position than they are right now. So you just have to be careful. As much as you want to make a trade, you don't want to do anything that really jeopardizes the next couple years, where I still think there is a pretty good window, at least for the next 2 years. So you kind of try to find that sweet spot from valuing the fact that you're in the pennant race right now, but you don't want to do anything downright foolish. You don't want to deal Dylan Bundy for Andrew Cashner. You just don't do anything silly like that, because you're just...
Or Jake Arrieta for Feldman.
Well,
that's the way a Cubs fan would talk about it right now, right?
Sure. So, it's tough. And again, I'm not trying to be wishy-washy. The fact that their farm system is in the position that it's in right now, where they don't have pieces to deal, that's an indictment on the organization. Now, I'm not criticizing Dan Duquette for failing to make a trade right now for that action as much as not having the flexibility, not having the pieces in the organization to have that be an option. So, I mean, that's kind of where the Orioles are right now. We'll see. Certainly, we'll see as they get into August with the waiver deadline as well. I'm not saying that they're going to find an impact signing there, but they might be able to find someone that can help them in some way. But it's just, we've kind of talked about this for weeks now. It's been slim pickings, and
we didn't expect much. I mean, the bar was very low because anyone that can look at it can see there's not a lot of players out there.
Yeah.
They don't have the tools to do it, and their need is pretty much everyone's need. And dealing away another Jake Arrieta for some fifth starter that's going to come in and be painfully mediocre for 8 weeks that sort of kind of can't help you anyway. It's just. I mean, again, there's just no expectation anything was going to happen, so there should be no shock if and when it doesn't happen. But for other organizations, Luke, it has been a reality, and there has been activity, and most of these teams, you can look, whether it was the Nationals or whether it was the Indians, the Cubs certainly, have really improved their baseball team over the last month.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, with the Cubs, with Chapman, that's clearly a postseason-driven move. I mean, they're going to win that division, barring an absolute collapse. I don't think there's any way that St. Louis is going to hang with them. I mean, the Pirates, we saw them deal their closer, over the weekend. So, but, some of these moves, it's like, okay, how are you setting yourself up for the postseason? How are you setting yourself up for the stretch run? Let's keep in mind, again, most of these acquisitions are only providing some incremental improvement, but I think it's very interesting. You mentioned Cleveland. They are a team that over the last few years, we've seen them with the starting pitching, and there's been big question marks as far as would they be willing to pull the trigger. They have a good farm system, had good prospects, and they certainly did it getting Andrew Miller. They tried to do it with LaCroix, who vetoed the trade, which I thought was really interesting dynamic as far as everything that trickled out about that on Sunday. But
that was really weird, right? Like when a guy says, "I don't want to go play for a winning team."
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I understand that a guy trying to leverage. I mean, having a limited no trade clause is someone who's under contract and underpaid. Considering what his value is, that's one way you can try to maneuver yourself to getting a little more money or whatever. Talk about him trying to get the option year wiped out so he can hit the market sooner.
Well, I know one thing he's not going to do in Milwaukee in the next 8 weeks, and that's win a championship, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not defending him, but I at least, I understand where he's trying to come from, but at the same time, it's just like, wow, that's a chance to, Cleveland's going to be in the postseason. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Detroit, to their credit, has gotten hot, so, they have someone on their heels, at least a little bit. But, that was interesting to see how that plays out. But it shows Cleveland, because they had some attractive pieces in their farm system, they kind of felt, okay, the time's now to go for it. So, really interesting.
Well, good for them. Good for them, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Hey, if the Orioles had a stock system right now and they were kind of dragging their feet about, making a couple acquisitions, I'd be crushing them for that. There's no doubt about that. This doesn't give them a pass. I'm saying the indictment is the system is in the state that it's in right now. You got to improve that. You got to draft well. You got to develop. You got to sign international talent. Been talking about this for a long time. I mean, when Dan Duquette deals competitive balance picks to dump Brian Mattis's salary, I don't like seeing that, quite frankly, because that's I'm not saying that you're drafting the next Bryce Harper or Mike Trout necessarily, but it's more, those are more lottery tickets. Those draft picks, it's a chance to find a great player, and when you give those up, and when you aren't as active in the international market, and you're not drafting well, those are things that that adds up to having a bottom 5 in baseball, minor league system, and that's what leaves you on the outside looking in late July when you have an opportunity to try to make a move. Again, I'm not the type to say make a move just for the sake of doing it, but at least like having the capital to. If there's a move that you really like, a move that can really help your club, you like having the ability to be able to do that, and the Orioles just aren't in that position right now.
And here come the Texas Rangers, also surging, winners of 4 ball games, getting a little rest as well, and first place in the American League West. They're in for 3 games. Birds and the Rangers after a day off. Meanwhile, the Ravens will crank it up downtown as well as out in Owings Mills all week. Luke will be on the scene there as well as at Oriole Baseball. You can follow his journey on Twitter At Baltimore Luke. You can also email him, Luke at WNST.net. I'm Nasty at WNST.net, whether you're out on Snapchat or Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course our Facebook Live, as well as our WNSTV channel on YouTube. We are very, very available. And anything you miss, you can find in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere your mobile device takes you. The morning newspaper arrives in your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning, and it is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Last but never least, breaking news, trading deadline, all that good stuff happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That is powered up by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.